Amy Cooper picked a bad week and the wrong victim to trot out her white privilege this week. Christian Cooper is an avid birder, and he was out in the fairly wild bramble of New York's Central Park watching for birds. Signs in the area tell dog owners that their dog has to be on a leash, but Amy had let hers go and her dog was scaring away the birds. So he asked her politely to put her dog on a leash. She refused. Christian insisted. And then Amy played that card. That card that black men have seen way too often. She summoned all of her white privilege, that white privilege that belongs especially to women. And she called the police and accused Christian of threatening her life and her dog. She demanded that the cops come immediately and make him stop. I do declare there's a black man here and I am scared. Amy picked the wrong guy. Christian, not that it should matter, but he's a Harvard-educated professional, and he just wasn't going to fall for this ploy. He recorded her racist attempt to assert her privilege and posted online where, in the week when George Floyd had been brutally murdered by 4 Minneapolis police, the video went viral. Even Christian now feels like the public response to Amy's racist phone call has been a little over the top. Her employer fired her just because they didn't want their company associated with her. Her employment, and I'm guessing her safety in New York City, is over. So I don't want to just pile on. It's easy to hate on someone like Amy Cooper, especially this week. She is not personally responsible for the racism that has led to the killing of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Atiana Johnson, or Philando Castile. But she is representative of it because her response to her sudden infamy is almost as familiar to us as the words that George Floyd and Derek Garner, both of whom uttered just before they died. I can't breathe. When Amy's name became known, she released a public apology, and it included this familiar phrase, I'm not a racist. I'm deeply sorry, but I'm not a racist. She told the police that he was threatening her life, but the next day she insists, I didn't want anything bad to happen to him, because, men and women, what bad could happen to a black man in the park when a woman claims that a black man is threatening her life? Last year, the police shot and killed 1,099 people in America. And that's not counting victims like George Floyd and Derek Garner, who were not shot. They were choked to death. In all of last year, there were 27 days in the calendar year when the police didn't kill anybody. And as you already know, a black man is 3 times more likely to be shot than a white man. And this isn't even a deep South issue. A black man is 6 times more likely to be shot by the police in Oklahoma City than in Georgia. I've been to Oklahoma City. I've never seen a black man there. You were there. Okay, all right, Derek, not you. When you run the numbers, there is not a direct relationship between the size of the black population and police shootings of black men. There's not a direct relationship between the crime rates or gang membership in related incidents in a city and the frequency of the police shooting of black men. The truth about race in America is complicated. And for the most part, it isn't what you think it is. It isn't because of black crime. It isn't because of gangs. It is something else. And again, I don't want to just flog Amy Cooper in public because, oh my God, she's an easy target. What I do want to say to all of my white friends and all of my white listeners is that there is an Amy Cooper that is lurking inside all of us. I'm a white guy from rural Kentucky. I was raised by gun-toting, uneducated children of the South. That doesn't mean that I've got a PhD in racism. In fact, it's the opposite. I know about racism the same way that a fish knows about water. We are a part of the culture, and the culture is a part of us. I knew when I heard Amy Cooper do what she did that was an unreflective, stupid, white privileged, racist moment. I spotted it just like that. And what's more, when I heard Joe Biden telling Charlemagne that if he's undecided about how he's going to vote in November, that you ain't black. When I heard that, my stomach hit the floor. Joe Biden is a two-legged gaff machine, but even for an old white guy, under any circumstances, to say that a black man isn't black if he doesn't agree, that's not a gaffe, that's political suicide. But it's hard for a fish to be aware of water. It's hard for Joe Biden or Amy Cooper or Roger Ray or David Ketchum or Sean Spires or any of us white folks here or we white folks watching to be aware of our white privilege and how often we either consciously or unconsciously use it. Amy Cooper says that she's not a racist, but we all know that, no, really, you totally are. And Joe Biden would insist that he's not a racist, but these gaffes don't come out of thin air. That's the thing about a Freudian slip. The slip comes from somewhere. Now, he's not nearly as racist as Donald Trump, but that's not a watermark anybody wants to be compared to. Joe Biden has lingering white privilege all over him. And I'm not even going to say that I'm not a racist. I can say that I've spent my entire adult life trying to distance myself from the environment in which I grew up, but I'm not going to claim to have achieved it, or someone here would surely point out to me sometime very recently when I have exercised white privilege. Even if it's just being able to walk around the square downtown without being heckled by a bunch of white guys in a pickup truck yelling racial epitaphs at me. But more likely, when I get pulled over by the police for speeding, and I'm not saying it's happened more than 6 or 7 times, I have never been given a ticket in Springfield. Because I don't have to say to the police officer, have you noticed, white? You just have a little friendly chat among white guys, and they don't write me a ticket, and here I go. You remember, David, when we got pulled over a month or so ago, the police took a long time checking out the license tag, walking around the car. Then he came up to the window, handed me my license, and said, now y'all have a nice day and be more careful, would you? Does that happen to black folks in town? White people don't have to ask for privilege at the bank, in the courtroom, or even when we're protesting in public places, even when I'm doing what I know is illegal, when I'm stopping business in a demonstration in front of McDonald's, I'm slowing down people getting their Egg McMuffin because I'm a socialist. They still won't arrest me. Sure, we're talking about this today because George Floyd was brutally choked to death by a policeman in Minneapolis. I want justice. I want justice for George Floyd and for his family, justice that was denied to Philando Castillo's family. Like all of you, I want to see the police involved in this murder charged and taken to trial. And I want them to receive a fair trial, not a white man's trial. I want them to receive a fair trial and a just sentencing if they are found guilty. But what I don't want to do is come in here today and just rant and bluster about this injustice and be guilty of losing the context of all of it. While we never want to lose the value of any one unique human life that is unjustly taken, we don't want to just have a series of angry outbursts and then not do anything. It's about George Floyd, but you can't pull his death away from its association to the recent shooting of Ahmaud Arbery in Georgia. And you can't help associate his choking death with the death of Derek Garner or Missouri's own Michael Brown. Each has their own story. Each one leaves behind a grief-stricken family. But, and this is as much my fault as anyone's, we get mad, we get sad, we make demands, and then we go on to living our lives. Minneapolis is on fire this week, mostly because of George Floyd, but not just because of George Floyd. I don't know much about Minneapolis, but I know that they've been in the news for police killing of unarmed black men several times in recent years. About 20% of the city is black, but if you've watched the news, you may have noticed that the majority of protesters are white because the city's heritage of police violence against black men is not a secret. And most white people are not indifferent about this. Most white people want racism to stop. They want the police killings of unarmed black men to stop. But beyond expressing public rage in the immediate aftermath, what can be done? I propose two foci. First, we need to consider what can be done immediately to make things better. And secondly, we need to look into the roots of racism and figure out how to get rid of it forever. Now, please forgive me if this seems rather prescriptive, but the topic is too important for me to be misunderstood. You know, when I pull out a chart, things are getting grim. I believe that we need to immediately reform policing, but not policing by itself. As I've been saying for years, our justice system is broken. Police who shoot and kill unarmed black men are rarely even charged with crimes. And when they are, they seem to magically be acquitted or found innocent, even if it goes to court. And the whole world has watched the video of an obvious murder. This two-tiered justice system is primeval, and it has to be reformed. And there is no place as racially charged as our jails and prisons, where the prison staff are often just as racist as the racially defined gangs that they're trying to manage in incarceration. I think we need to reform all three dimensions of this cultural problem simultaneously, and yesterday wouldn't be too soon. But how do we do it? And here's some good news. There are best practices that are field tested that we already know will work to reduce race-related crime while we work on writing a memorial service for racism generally. From Ferguson to Minneapolis and all points in between, we see that white men are way overrepresented in law enforcement, as well as in the judiciary and in the penal system. We need to intentionally and specifically create a staff in all three levels that is reflective of the culture in which they exist. Recruiting needs to include background and psychological testing to weed out racists and people who have extreme needs for authority and recognition. But secondly, we need to diffuse the whole them and us mentality among police who typically are just in cruisers and the people who are on the streets. We need to get back to having cops on sidewalks, interacting with business owners and neighbors. There needs to be a lot more facial recognition that is not based on a computer program, that's based on the fact that they literally know each other. The research literature indicates that the worst of these racially influenced murders take place when white men are assigned to teams together. When a man is paired with a woman, or when a white cop is paired with a person of color, they are much less likely to do something like what we saw happen in Minneapolis this week, when a white policeman knelt on a black man's neck. And look, there were two more white policemen kneeling on him at the same time, on his back and on his legs, while he slowly suffocated. Now, the coroner's report has said that there's no signs of asphyxiation, that his death was due to underlying circumstances. This is probably going to get us kicked out of YouTube, but that's the same old bullshit we've been hearing for 100 years. It either was he was collapsing his carotid artery or he was collapsing his esophagus, but he killed him. And the coroner is doing what the coroners almost always do when the police kill someone. They try to pretend like, oh, I don't know, he just died. He just died, when he was just killed. I believe that if there had been a black officer on the scene, that George Floyd would be alive today. I believe if there had been a woman on the scene, that George Floyd would be alive today. What happens when you put white men together is they get very primitive about expressing their masculinity and their power. Now, fourthly, cultural awareness needs to be taught constantly. We've made progress in this a lot in the last 2 generations. Television even subtly exposes straight people to gay people. It exposes cisgen people to trans folk, white folk to black people. But I have to admit, one of my white privilege issues is that I map out sermons months in advance, and I tend to think about what's current events. I tend to ignore Black History Month. I tend to ignore Gay Pride Month. We need to be cross-pollinating our minds with the cultures of others 12 months out of the year. This can't become a back burner issue that we only trot out when there's been a tragedy. What if every member of the police force, every member of the judiciary, and every prison staff member in America had to read 3 of Toni Morrison's novels in the next year? Maybe everyone can't really learn what they need to know from a sociology class, but if you just read a fiction novel written by someone who articulates the black experience in such a profound way that even I have to get up and go look in a mirror to be sure that I'm not a black young woman in Georgia, then maybe people can begin to understand a culture that they've always stood outside of. There's no way to reliably prove it, but if there were, I would bet $1,000 right now that Amy Cooper has never read a Toni Morrison novel, because if she had, the words she said would have stuck in her throat. Now, these 4 proposals are not original to me. This is what I found in the professional literature. But I do have one more thing I want to talk about, something I've talked about before over the years, and I've not yet encountered it in the literature. But you know what it feels like when you just know that you're right? I'm right about this one. I'm going to conclude with this point, not because I'm finished, but because I have to stop somewhere. But I'm going to talk about this one. We'll have more sermons on this channel this summer on how to root racism out of our society, but we're talking right now about immediate impact. I want to talk about the thin blue line that always says that law enforcement officers always have the back of every other law enforcement officer. Now, I get it. The job is sometimes very dangerous. Cops can't confidently face the dangers they try to mitigate in the streets if they can't trust their peers to have their back. I even did a stint years ago as a reporter on a military base. I have felt the camaraderie among the ranks. I know how deep and how powerful that sense of brotherhood is. But guys, don't you wonder if anyone in the Minneapolis police force in the 3rd District was surprised on Friday that Derek Chauvin was arrested and charged with third-degree murder? His wife filed for divorce. I mean, nobody likes this guy. In fact, if we had taken a confidential poll among law enforcement officers last week, asking them just to guess which member of their force was the most likely to kill an unarmed black man, I would bet you that his name would have come up over and over again. Most people who choose to go into policing do have a high need for order and structure, and most typically have a personal desire for power and recognition. That's who's attracted to the job. But when you combine that with a latent sense of racial superiority, that's when this crap happens. I believe in everything that I said earlier about diversifying the force, humanizing policing, mixing police partners by race and gender, and including cultural sensitivity training. But come on, we could cut down on the number of unarmed black men killed by white cops this week if the so-called good cops would stop covering for the bad cops. And guys, what makes you deserve to be respected and looked up to? What on earth qualifies you to be thought of as being a good cop if you're covering for, if you are protecting, if you are in every literal sense an ally with the violent, racist, stupid, unhinged monsters who masquerade as people who have pledged to serve and protect the vulnerable on the streets? Who knew that it would come to this with Derek Chauvin and didn't report him and still thinks that they deserve a shield and a gun? Come on, cops. Look at this headline from the Los Angeles Times. Getting killed by the police is a leading cause of death among young black men in America. You are doing this. You are murdering black American citizens, and you are hiding the people who pull the trigger. This week, I am asking you to be a man and stop it. I love my friends who are loyal and supportive, but not when I'm wrong. My friends, the people who love me, should be the first ones who confront me when I'm wrong. You shouldn't cover my tracks and lie for me. When you silently listen to racist remarks without responding, you are embedding racism into the culture. When you laugh at a racist joke, you are setting up some young black man who doesn't deserve it to be treated as if he were subhuman. And when you let that openly racist cop 3 lockers down from you put on a badge and strap on a weapon and head out into the streets, then you are nothing but the dog feces on the soul of society. You're better than this. If you want us to buy this protect and serve line, then you need to show us some integrity. If every law enforcement agency doesn't do a deep dive of their staff and cut at least 10%, I mean, can anyone believe that there's a police force in America that doesn't have at least 10% racist on their force? That's what they've got to do for us to take them seriously and to show them respect. Now, I'm not saying that rioters should have burned down the 3rd Precinct Police Headquarters in Minneapolis. I'm just saying that if all of you morally equivocating cops who didn't report Derek Chauvin know why it happened, and you have to know you had it coming. There are a lot of things that scholars and psychologists, sociologists and criminologists have to say about how to change the system to make it better. But I want to be clear about this. Nothing gets the individual cop off the hook for not reporting the racist who you work with every day. You know who you are, and you need to do your part if you're asking us to do our part. Amen.
Thank you for watching our videos. We are entirely dependent on the donations of our listeners and members. We hope that you find this content to be important enough to help us to keep offering these videos to the public at no charge by becoming a regular contributor. Please click on the donate button on our website at www.spfccc.org. Thank you for your support of progressive religious programming.